So what you can do now is pause this video lecture and watch the demo on the Quasar component library review. So we're going to talk a little bit about the mashup. Slightly older term, right? There are some newer terms that you might hear: Hackfest, Hackathon, App Challenge. Slight difference in my mind. A mashup really didn't have a time constraint on it. It just described something, a web app or a website you had made. The Hackfest Hackathon App Challenge, they definitely seem to have a time constraint on them. Hey, we need to build an app in a day or over a weekend. App Challenge also has another one where you're typically using something at platform as a service. So if you go back to the sharing levels, that very top level of sharing called infrastructure, and so platform as a service where you're using a particular, it's not so mixed. It's a particular set of resources from a company in that often. But again, depends who's defining these terms and that sort of thing. Now they all kind of fill in or fall into the category of building an app quickly from a bunch of different libraries and sources, and so even though even myself, I said there seems to be a time constraint on the hacking part in that. And even App Challenges usually has a deadline to get your app in that. But basically, you build an app or site, right, from many sources. So we might be getting data from some data from the city of Surrey, but then there's also some data from the government, from different types of web services, from different types of REST JSON services. And maybe we're getting just raw attribute data that we're doing the linking. If you're familiar with databases, inner and outer joins and linking data sets together. So, we're doing that with code typically on the fly because it is coming from different sources that aren't aware of each other. So we have to manually join them somehow. So we get a chart from here, we get a map from there, and then we add lots of glue and that sort of thing. And so this, getting data from a more federated system in that. So maybe a bunch of different enterprise systems. And that, if we go back to those sharing levels, right? It is a bit of the wild, wild west. Get it done, right? That sort of thing. But it is very agile and lean, and so it's not a bad way to. And a lot of these techniques and tooling, like the use of GitHub and that as you're collaborating to track changes to the code and sync them all, and that. All help you do fast prototyping, which helps you with agile development in that. So to make something fast, get in front of the users and ask, is this what you were thinking? Get feedback from them, incorporate it, make changes in that. That part I just described there is more of like a methodology design, more of a production app. But the same techniques that you would need for a mashup Hackfest hackathon is you got to cobble something together. I know there might be negative connotations around cobble, but no, you're grabbing a bunch of different stuff off the shelf to build an app or a prototype quickly. In that, now some of these things that we create, although there might have been a temporary nature to them, some of them stick and live for a very long time. Right? They get adopted or people like them and they start using them, and they get a whole bunch of users using them and they can't get rid of them sometimes. So the best way to get a feel for a mashup is probably to deconstruct something. We've seen all this on cooking shows. We deconstruct a meal, right? To begin to understand that, tear one apart. That would be the concept. So we can go take a look at the EcoDash one. It's not too bad. I'll do it more in the demo, but I'll say a little bit here. It's, it can be confusing just what data you're looking at the time, so they can improve some stuff there. But it looks like, visits to a transfer station. They have a different name that they're using in that. But basically people dropping off their junk at a recycling depot or a transfer station, that kind of concept. And it's looking at the number of visits for users in that. There's a blog post that gets into more detail. The GitHub repository is pretty good. I do like their to-do list and stuff. And there's the site is live, and you can go look at it. Although, it's live, as in it's running, but how live is the data? It's always a good question. Again, look at their to-do list on GitHub and you'll see. So what you can do now is pause this video lecture and watch the demo on EcoDash. Now that you're back, right, so some of the highlights, the data, transfer station visit, that's what I would call it. I mean, that's what it's, there's one, I live in the lower mainland, so there's one up by Port Kells. I've been to it. I've been to return it stations and that sort of thing as well. So that's the nature of that. These are like fixed sites that people go to, and they're just looking at how many people are coming and going, right? And that how busy they are. That they're mostly usually busy. There is some interactivity between the charts, right? But you might notice that the map is very static. I think I did take the time to show you. I think they even hard coded the data right in the code. Big no-no, but that's okay. And that sort of thing. On GitHub, like I said, love the to-do list, right? Update the data has not been checked off yet. That still has to be done. And that, and so there's a few optimization things they want to do as well, right? That's a good to-do list, classic one. There is some, they mentioned this in the to-do list, but you also notice from the demo, like some of that is static, some is dynamic within the page. It's not dynamically pulling data from some backend server, but the interactivities, there's some dynamic nature to the dashboard that if I change something in this control, it changes something in another control. And the scripts we're actually going to go over on the next slide. So some of those key libs and that sort of thing. So data, reactive, right? Well, one I'll point out, something we take for granted is the map is very reactive as we pan and zoom over it. But we also got to understand that that's about all that's happening. Just some tiles are dropping in. Those markers aren't being pulled. They're hard-coded in the code. But, you know, the map component control itself is reactive in that, you know, you change your position, it goes grabs more tiles from a backend server for you. It is using D3. D3 is very common for visualizations. It pops up all over the place, and that there are other charting options, absolutely, but it is a popular visualization. It has charts, but you'd be surprised. It's got all types of visualizations for data. In that bubbles, pack bubbles, zoom pack bubbles, all these different things. There is a data filter, and so that's important. Is filtering on dashboards is pretty important. We might dig into that more when we talk about platforms in the future. In that, but it's when you do something in one control that filters the data for another control, and so you should see the charts like moving and updating. There's also cross filter, but it's needed by DC, or what we call a dependency. So a dependency of DC is this other library called cross filter in that, but it's the one that filters the data between the controls in that. In terms of responsive, Keen.io, which are templates for Bootstrap, so therefore you need Bootstrap, and they work together. But again, they're dealing more on the responsive side in that. And of course, there's always some utilities like jQuery. jQuery is a popular library. There are some, you know, roots. You can kind of see a little bit of the jQuery style in Leaflet. So if you're working with Leaflet a lot, then picking up jQuery I'm not going to say it's going to be easy, but it's easier over time in that because it's the same style. And that goes back to that, you know, senior Java developer and reaction to senior Java developer. The rules, are there any? And because it's a very flexible language, JavaScript, speaking of there, so there's a lot of different ways, and therefore over time we see a lot of different camps with a lot of different styles. And so for me, because I come from more a structured code side, class, method, property, the syntax, you know, it's usually a lot of like L dot parentheses, dot parentheses, changing stuff all in one line. jQuery is much like that. I think they use, instead of L, they use the $sign in that. But it's a very different style of how to change something in that. And this is something there's enough choice out there that if you wanted to, you could probably avoid jQuery, or if it works for you, by all means, I mean, get in there and use it. The key is to get things done. Talk a little bit about app development lifecycle, just to formalize it so we have some steps. So plan, right? The purpose of the app, right? The audience, in that. So what type of user is this app for? In that, what is the required data? This is more like a JS thing. Like, you're going to have this app, it's going to need data. Do we actually have that? And it gets into even like past demo we just did, the fact that, that's like a snapshot of the data at one time. And, so even in that app, that's something they want to figure out, to get a live feed, right? So that is, updated all the time in that. And so what is the data that you need? Hopefully it exists. You don't want to get into Helga's house of pain, as I say, if the data doesn't, this magical data layer that you need actually does not exist. What are you going to do? Mock it up as a prototype? Maybe. What's spatial? What's attributes? Formats can matter. So your goal would be, hey, we got a GeoPackage or file geodatabase. The question is, we're not going to get that into the browser, so we need some chunk of middleware to get it into GeoJSON. Do we do like one time it, convert it ourselves, but do we want it to be a live feed? All these issues, right? About that's more detailed stuff, but the big thing is, does that data exist? What part's spatial? Go into the map. What part's attribute? Go into a table or chart. And then you got to come up with a design, right? So big thing about design is you kind of got to know where you are and where you're going, point A, point B, and then you can draw an arrow between the two, and that got to know where you're going, right? A big thing in development is, hey, we're going to the desktop, or we're going to the web, or we're going to mobile. And so that can completely change the technology that you use to do that, okay? There's enough today that you could kind of make web stuff work on the phone, and you can build desktop applications using web technology. Electron is a framework that does that. We build desktop apps, but it's, in the end, the user interface is spec'd out with HTML and CSS, and all the responding to people clicking on stuff is handled with JavaScript. But again, Electron, an app that you probably have seen me use, VS Code, is an Electron app. In that, it's really Chrome browser under the hood. Determine the path. So know where you're going, so you can determine the path, right? How to get there. To do that, you got to know your box. Okay, and by that, what kind of, are you a Postgres shop, Microsoft SQL Server shop? Are you an Oracle shop? And what kind of web services do you really have, or your IT team or you can support? So are you GeoServer? Are you ESRI? Are you doing something else? You're writing your own middleware on that kind of thing in that, or you're going to use a cloud provider. And if you do, well, how do they spit the data out and that sort of thing? Lots of, how much server side, right? Again, are you doing it? Python, PHP, Python, Java, it's a different set of technology and that, or if you're using some type of cloud provider, how are their services set up? But then you got to build it, got to get everything in place, hardware, software. Maybe the hardware is virtual. You drop your credit card, you spin up a server in the Amazon cloud, or you piggyback off an existing architecture like ArcGIS Online. What tiers are you going to have on the data and services in that? So these are all decisions you have to make that can affect how you build the application on the web. Like I said before, here's like a thing where maybe the data is technically stored in Postgres SQL Server, but I have GeoServer in the middle that will flip it from Postgres to GeoJSON, right? Or something else. Or maybe I write my own stuff, or I use Apache and PHP to do the flip and that sort of thing. So it all depends, right? So, or maybe I use QGIS Map Server and it will flip it for me into an OGC web mapping service. So it's you got to figure that out, because it can fundamentally change how you want to code something. And that, of course, you got to test. Make sure you budget the time. Important to get someone else to test. You're too close to the application. You know how to avoid all its warts and imperfections. You have to get someone else there. Especially if it's like a cold, they have never seen it before, they'll give you lots of feedback on things that are not so intuitive or not so obvious. And then deploy, right? For us, we have to piece some files to JS Web. That's all fine. But in the end, sometimes deployment is a little more tricky. What if we pick Node.js? And then we're talking about, well, probably have to make a Docker container and stick our app inside it and that sort of thing. And then, okay, we need some startup scripts to start the service and stop it. Okay, now where are we going to put this in the cloud? And that sort of thing. So some deployments can be simple because the backend architecture is simple. Apache PHP, it's directory and files. So you just got to get the stuff in the right spot, done. Others can be more tricky. Right? Like I agree with myself here. Rarely that easy that you just slide some files in place and everything's magically working.